public opinion is not going to be with you as you dismantle the status quo, because people are comfortable in the status quo.
And that's what's changing America. Tina Turner posted it, but it's from Martin Luther King in the letter from Birmingham jail, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negroes," and obviously that was the normal term back then, but besides that, imagine in this quote, if you replace Negro with people fighting to end this genocide, people fighting for Palestinian rights, you could just insert a slightly different term and have something that applies exactly right now. He says that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the KK clanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to quote unquote order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, unquote, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season, unquote. But even those who are willing to say that Israel needs to stop this genocide immediately want to police other people's tactics. And it's like, when you're facing a genocide, when there's this much blood on America's hands, to say, oh, you can't do it like that. You can't do it with those words. You can't do it with that kind of poster, is ridiculous.
I'm glad you shared that. I love that letter.
Yeah, it's a very powerful and important letter.
I recommend folks read the full letter. That's kind of like the part that gets shared the most, but the letter in its entirety is a great piece.
There's been multiple moments where you're like, wow, this is exactly like the protests during Vietnam, how our country's responding. Colombia, as I covered on here as well, attacked their students on the 56th anniversary to the day of the time they attacked them in 1968 with the NYPD. But here's something else. This is a poll from 1961. It says, do you think the sit-ins at the lunch counters and the freedom buses and other demonstrations by Negroes will hurt or help the Negroes' chances of being integrated in the South? Hurt, 57% of America said. Help, 27%. And no opinion, 15%. So the
no opinions are in the same group as the hurt,
yeah,
by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't get to be passive on this subject.
Yeah, you can't be neutral on a moving train. But overwhelming majority of Americans basically said, don't protest your own, for lack of a better word, apartheid state you live in.
It is apartheid.
Yeah, and don't protest it. Don't even sit on a bench stool that you're supposedly not allowed to. And that's what America does. America goes with the propaganda that's put forward by our mainstream media, and that's where the beliefs of the people usually is or are. But you know what's changing? But you know what's changing is that so many people are getting their news from not the mainstream media, from outlets like wherever you're watching me right now. Despite being heavily suppressed, despite the fact we're both so heavily suppressed, you're still, at least some of you are still able to get this information, and that's what's changing America.
Well, and I think speaking of things that we often get wrong, we have a warped perspective of the past. The American public, when polled after Kent State, thought that the response by the National Guard was appropriate. As in
shooting kids
that were against and I think this was basically when we went into Cambodia and Laos too, like basically like this massacring of people in Asia was not cool and is not a good idea. And like these students were basically saying that, much as these students are saying the same thing today. And the majority of the United States thought that the response of the National Guard to shoot people who were saying that was appropriate. So we have this idea that like public opinion was with the protesters when no. That's what comes after. Now, I bet if you polled the larger American public today about whether they thought Kent State was a good idea, they'd probably say no. And so this is
Mandela was called a terrorist. Then he became the president of the country.
So the first African-American president.
You gotta explain that. You can't just throw that out there. There was like I think it was local news. I don't think it was national. But
So awesome.
when Nelson Mandela died, one of the anchors said he was the first African American president of South Africa, which not African American.
Just African, actually. Again, like I think it's important to recognize that like public opinion is not going to be with you. Public opinion is not going to be with you as you dismantle the status quo, because people are comfortable in the status quo. We are the frog in this boiling, ever warming and boiling water, and we don't want to admit that that's happening. So retrospectively, we can be like, yeah, that was not good that Black people couldn't use the bathroom.
Right.
But in the moment, most people are like, this is fine. I don't know what the problem is.
And weirdly, we're fighting over bathrooms again. What is it with us and where people can piss? Why is that such?
It's a good question. Like, why do you care?
Why is that the thing?